So I'm sorry I didn't get the best and worst countdown of 2016 before New Year's, but unfortunately I was a little busy and couldn't really film. I got a new setup for right now because I don't want to get in the family's way when they're doing stuff, because normally I film in the living room and there's no doors or anything, so I could possibly get a little too loud. I still had some catching up to do before New Year because I had 5 more movies I had to see in theaters. To try to make a little bit more of a complete list, the list will not be complete. I have not seen all the movies I want to see for 2016. But I still like to do an end of the year countdown just to show what I'm feeling at the end of the year. Eventually, hopefully, I'll see everything I want to see and make a real complete best of and worst of 2016. Hopefully before the weekend I have some catching up to do with movie reviews and countdowns and all the crazy stuff that I've unfortunately haven't gotten time to do. Now, like my movie reviews, I like to start with the good before I do the bad, but unfortunately my best of 2016 for the end of the year edition isn't quite complete. I'm still messing around with different movies and different spots. But I have a more complete list for the worst of 2016, so let's start with the bad. Now, bear in mind, this is a countdown of my personal opinion of what I felt were the worst movies of 2016. If you have a different opinion, that is completely fine. You're entitled to your own opinions. Also, bear in mind, I have not seen all the movies this year. I have seen over 150 movies. But there's a lot of stinkers, a lot of movies that have gotten really bad reviews that I haven't seen yet. Emphasis on the yet. And now there were a lot of really great movies and a lot of really bad movies this year. Some of these films I couldn't believe made it into theaters. Now, of course, it depends on what movies you've seen this year. Like, if you've only seen 5 movies and the worst movie you saw was something you really liked, well, that's going to be your worst film of the year. It's all based on what you've seen. I've seen over 150 movies this year, so yeah, I have a large list. And there are just so many movies that were so bad, you won't believe what movies did not make this list. I am doing a top 25 worst films of 2016 for me, and these films did not even make the cut. Incarnate didn't make it, Exposed didn't make it, Zoolander 2 didn't make it, well, mainly because I kind of liked it when I first saw it. Now it's sort of become forgettable. The most disappointing Purge movie didn't make it, the Purge election year. Independence Day Resurgence didn't even make the cut. And yes, it's kind of an average movie for me, but I've had this whole rant about it when I did my movie review, and so I changed the rating, but still, didn't even make the cut. I don't have Now You See Me 2 on here. I don't have Ghostbusters on here. I don't have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows, Assassin's Creed, Alice Through the Looking Glass, Backtrack, Allegiant, The Fifth Wave, Gods of Egypt, The Wildlife, and even The Boss. All those films didn't even make my top 25 worst films of 2016. And if you're surprised, well, wait until you actually hear my list. I think most of you will somewhat agree, yeah, these films are kind of garbage. So the first movie on this list, my number 25 out of the worst films of 2016 for me, is a Western, and it's called Diablo. Now, this was a January film, and to many people it's probably going to be a straight-to-DVD film because it didn't get a lot of theater coverage, I don't think. And this is not the only time on this list where you will see Scott Eastwood. With all the really great Westerns we've been having lately, well, this is definitely not one of them. In fact, even though it is set up as a Western, it has a little bit underneath it that's maybe a dark fairy tale or a thriller or something along those lines. There's something a little gothic beneath it. Unfortunately, it still doesn't help it to make it interesting. I just love how this cover is so deceiving. It tries to make Scott Eastwood look like his father. It makes him look like Clint Eastwood. It looks like it's almost the same kind of style you would expect a cover from a Western film that Clint Eastwood would be in. It has that sort of almost art-like style to it. It's him pointing a gun, and there's something about it that makes him look like Clint Eastwood in this photo, or painting, or cover, this poster. But let's face it, he is no Clint Eastwood in this movie. And the crazy thing about this plot makes it sound like, oh, this would actually be an exciting movie. It starts off with his house burning down, people supposedly taking his woman and running off, and him chasing after these bandits in this long stretch of open, well, not open, but this different, but out into the country, the forest, the wilderness, and tons of other places. And throughout it, he's meeting this mysterious man in black, and all these different people that pretty much all die around him. It's got a little bit of horror, it's got a little bit of Western, but there's something about it. It's executed in a very, not lazy, but some bland, boring style. And there was one moment in this film where it was executed in a way that I just frickin' laughed. If you want to know more about that scene, either check out my movie review for Diablo or check out my worst films of January 2016 list, because in one of those is the clip. The only thing exciting about the film was the last act of the film, when it becomes a shootout, and it's actually done pretty well. Everything else is a slow, meandering pace that's boring and bland, and not even suspenseful, not even thrilling. It's just, it happens. But there are some moments within this film that are just hilariously bad and entertaining in that way. I'll at least give Diablo that. My number 24 is yet another January film, and out of the 2 horror movies that came out in January, many felt they were above average compared to January films, and many people liked this one over The Boy. Personally, I like The Boy over this movie, and my number 24 is The Forest. This honestly really sucks because this had potential. This had actors that I liked and did a fine job. It has a premise of a forest that is pretty much making people go insane, making people see things and make them kill each other, kill themselves. There's a unique premise in here that is really good, and if done right, is fantastic. But unfortunately, it's executed in a way where we pretty much know that almost everything that she sees in the forest is a hallucination. And it becomes to a point where it feels like the actress and the actors are doing a really dumb job, and the characters are being really dumb because we can look at it from an outside perspective and realize, yeah, it's making you kill yourself. This is a hallucination. You should figure this out by now. It just makes the characters look dumb in this aspect rather than us believing in the hallucination along with them. Or maybe that's just me seeing so many horror movies that it becomes predictable, but there's something about it where it's psychological thriller, it's a psychological horror, but I don't believe any of the hallucinations, and I know what's real and what's not. And when you know what's real and what's not in your first viewing of a psychological horror, then it doesn't work. Because the nice thing about psychological horror is you're questioning what's real and what's not. That's the great aspect to psychological horror. The Forest doesn't have that. Also, I wish that they could have a little bit of a Japanese-style horror in this film because they are in Japan, and it is Japanese ghosts, but it's almost too American in this movie, and it feels wrong. And instead of being scary or thrilling, there are many times I just found myself laughing and feeling like I was being trolled. Alright, I'm not going to go too much into my number 23 because hopefully I get to review it soon because it's one of those December movies that I haven't yet reviewed, and it is Collateral Beauty. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I hope to have a review for it soon, but there are 2 words I don't like to say in movie reviews. Well, there's a few words that I don't like to say in movie reviews. because ultimately there's some descriptions for movies that can just be a cop-out, an adjective that is overused. But for me, Collateral Beauty embodies manipulative and Oscar bait. And that's really hard for me to say because I've actually liked films that are Oscar baits, that are other people consider Oscar baits. And, well, and for the people that use Oscar bait as a negative term, that's how I feel about Collateral Beauty. My number 22 for the worst films of 2016 stars Miles Teller and an ensemble cast. No, it isn't Allegiant. It isn't Bleed for This. It isn't War Dogs. It's none of the films that got major releases that Miles Teller was in. No. This is a movie called Get a Job. I believe it's supposed to be a comedy mixed with drama, and to be frank, there are very few times in this film where I actually laughed. And at no point in this movie did I feel that it was dramatic enough to be effective. It's a very short movie, filled with a lot of subplots and a lot of different characters. It's an ensemble piece. But it's so short of a movie that it feels like you get the blueprints, the plot points, but none of the connections between those plot points. It feels unfinished. It feels underdeveloped the entire time. And there's a lot of good actors and actresses in this movie. It's just, I don't know what else to say about it. When it comes to boring, this was one of the most boring films I've seen all year. And this is number 22 on my list. My number 21 is a film that a lot of people are going to hate seeing on this list because it's had a bit of a cult following, and I don't quite understand it because, well, it doesn't feel good enough to even have a cult following. My number 21, 400 Days. It's a sci-fi movie that's pulling up the ranks of cult classic, but like I said, I don't understand why it's becoming a cult classic, why this low-budget sci-fi film is becoming considered underrated and underappreciated. It's a film that tries too hard to be smart, tries too hard to be a thriller, a psychological thriller, and horror, and sci-fi, and tries to be trippy, and tries to be twisty and turny, so much to the point where it doesn't have an ending, and it's like, okay, we had all these twists and turns, all these different possibilities of what's happening, and is it all an experiment, and is this all in their head, is this a psychological horror, what is this, and then it goes to the ending, and then it just cuts off, and has no ending, and it's like, you be the judge. Is it all real? Is it all an experiment? Is it really happening? Has the moon fallen onto the earth? Is this the apocalypse? Is it all just in their head? What is it? The problem is, there's so many little things that coordinate to all these different possible endings, and all these little things that might contradict other endings, to the point where none of those possible endings feel like they're the real ending. It feels like if you think of an ending for this movie, someone else can point out, well, because of this, that doesn't work. And you're like, oh, well then what about this? Oh, that little thing doesn't work here, so that contradicts it, so that ending doesn't work. Okay, well what about this thing? No, this little thing here contradicts that. It's a movie with no ending. Now if you're one of those people that doesn't pick it apart and doesn't see all the little different contradictions within each other, then you're going to think of an ending and not see those contradictions, and you'll think, oh, this is the smartest movie I've ever seen. This movie begs for you to examine it deeply. It begs for you to think of an ending and look at all the little pieces and solve the puzzle. But if you dig that deep into the movie, if you look at every little aspect of the film, then it becomes the dumbest movie ever, because it makes no sense. I've been saying one of these days I'm going to make an in-depth review of this movie, but I'm so behind on the normal movie reviews that I haven't gotten any time to do any in-depth reviews. Hopefully one day I will, and show just what I feel about this movie and why things don't work.